So my name is Brooke Barney. I am an animal rights activist from Lawrence, Kansas, which is in the US. And I'm mainly just gonna tell you guys about kind of like my experience with veganism and like what got me started in animal rights activism. So I actually became vegetarian when I was 9 years old. And the reason why I became vegetarian was because one of my older sisters showed me a video of a pig being killed. And she told me that that's what meat was. And before that, I think that I didn't actually know what I was eating, right? Because when we're kids, we don't really, we're not really told what we're eating. Our parents just give us food and we eat it. But once I realized that I was eating like a living sentient being, I just stopped. I was like, well, I don't want to hurt animals, so I'm not gonna eat meat anymore. And I think it was really shocking to me because I grew up in like rural Kansas, like in the country, and we had so many animals just like in our backyard. We had like dogs and pigs and chickens and horses and all of these animals that I really loved and care about and that were like all of my pets. And I realized I was like, well, if I'm eating a pig, like that could have been my pet. You know, I could have made a connection with that animal and loved them so much, and I just didn't think it was necessary. So I really considered myself like an ethical vegetarian. I was like, okay, I'm not hurting animals anymore, like this is okay. And I went 7 years being vegetarian, and every once in a while, like I would have someone ask me, they would be like, oh, do you just drink milk because cows just make it and we need to milk them? And I would be like, yeah, sure. Like, but I didn't actually know the answer to that question. I didn't actually know about the process. I just kind of like brushed it off and then kept going. And I think I met one vegan in the time that I was vegetarian. And I think it largely had to do with the fact that I was in Kansas. Like it's a very like agricultural area and there's not very many people that are vegan. But I met one vegan and I vividly remember telling him, I was like, I don't know how you do it. I was like, I could never be vegan. Like, I love cheese so much. And I literally, like, I used to eat cheese all of the time. I would go to barbecue restaurants with my family and get, like, grilled cheese and mac and cheese. And I would go home and I'd literally put it on a plate and put it in the microwave and fry it and just eat cheese. And then one day, 7 years later, after I'd become vegetarian, I started to think about it a little bit. And I was like, I feel like something's wrong. Like, people have asked me once in a while about milk, and I don't actually know the answer and just kind of brush it off. And I was like, I feel like my gut is telling me that something's not right here. And so I just went vegan. So I like cut out all the milk, I cut out all the eggs, and I went vegan overnight. And then later I started to learn about the dairy and the egg industry, and I was shocked. Because I started to look into it and I watched a video about dairy. And the video was talking about how, just like humans, cows have to be pregnant to produce milk, right? So the way that the farmers make them pregnant is through artificial insemination. So the farmer will take his entire forearm and he'll shove it into the anus of the cow in order to manipulate her cervix and inseminate her, while on what some people in the industry literally calls a rape rack. And then that mother cow will go through her 9-month pregnancy, and when she has her babies, if it's a boy, then he's sent to be killed for veal. And the reason why the boys in the dairy industry are killed is because boys won't grow up to make milk. And the industry is all about making money, right? Like they want to make a profit. So if this like baby boy cow isn't gonna make them a profit, then they're just gonna kill him. And if it's a female, then she goes into the same system. So she will be artificially inseminated. She'll have all of her babies taken from her. And then once their bodies don't produce much milk anymore, those mothers are also sent to the slaughterhouse. And they're used for things like low-grade meat. And I remember thinking about this and I was like, what the hell? Like this whole time, I went 7 years and I was consuming so much dairy and I had absolutely no idea that I was even hurting an animal. And what's really heartbreaking about the dairy industry too is like these mothers have so many babies because they're being consistently impregnated and having all of their babies ripped away from them. And you can like look up videos and see videos of these mothers bellowing out for days in search of their babies because they're so maternal and they create such a bond with all of their children before they're ripped away. And that's just the dairy industry. Then later I learned about the egg industry too, because I loved eating like cake and cupcakes and cookies, and I didn't really care whether there was like milk or eggs in it. But in the egg industry, it's standard practice to grind alive all of the day-old male chicks that are born. So they will genetically modify it so that the male chicks, when they're born, they'll be a different color. So in the hatcheries, they will separate the males and the females, and they put all of the male chicks on a conveyor belt. And then they go down this conveyor belt, and they're pushed into like a maciator, like a massive blender. And I would never hurt a baby. You know, a baby animal, like male chicks, like they're like little and cute, and that would have never, like, I would be appalled if I ever saw anything like that happening. But the problem was that I was in this society that was conditioning me and telling me not to think about it. You know, because when we walk into a supermarket and we purchase like meat, eggs, or dairy, or anything with those products in it, we're just thinking about food. Right? We're just like, I'm hungry, so I'm gonna buy this. And we're so separated from the actual process, right? So like if I'm buying some bacon, I just wanna eat that to like make me not hungry anymore. But I think if any of us had to actually watch a video of those animals being killed, we wouldn't wanna watch it anymore. Like we wouldn't wanna eat that stuff because watching that footage doesn't make us hungry. It makes us sad. It breaks our hearts. And I think that shows that our gut is telling us to be compassionate. You know, but I didn't even realize that like when I went vegan, I didn't help any animals. All I did was stop hurting them. You know, so I know like some vegans that literally they don't give a shit about animals. Like they don't care at all. They would like choose to like rather do something else with their time than hang out with animals. But they recognize that like they just don't want to do like cause unnecessary violence. Right? So sometimes I'll give people a scenario and I'll be like, okay, so if you were walking down the street and you saw someone beating a pig with a baseball bat, what do you think the ethical thing to do there is? And most people tell me, oh, well, I would step in. You know, I would say that that's wrong. But if we're comparing that to like veganism and eating meat, if you're a meat eater, like you're paying people to do that for you, right? Like that's the reason why that pig is being hurt, is because we're giving them our money. And if you said that you would step in and stop that person from hurting that pig, you're saying that you agree with being an animal rights activist. Because after I went vegan, it took me 4 years to even get involved in activism. Because I didn't want to be confrontational. You know, people like try and, I think our natural like instinct is to try and avoid confrontation. So sometimes people would talk to me about it, and like living in Kansas, people would make fun of me all the time, and I would just kind of like brush it off and be like, oh, it's okay, like we don't really need to talk about this. But then 4 years later, I ended up studying abroad in Perth, Western Australia. And before I went there, I posted in their Facebook group for vegans. And I was like, hey, like I would love to connect with some other vegans if anyone wants to hang out. And the people that messaged me happened to be like vegan activists. So I started hanging out with them, and they were like, hey, we're doing this thing called A Cube of Truth. Like we hold a screen, and like people come up and we start a conversation with them about it. So I went, but I was really nervous because I didn't want to like talk to strangers. I felt like that was like kind of weird. And it took me 4 cubes to even like gain the courage to talk to anyone about it. And then I did, and I had a conversation, and I was like, I talk about this all the time. Like, this isn't difficult. This is just like my everyday life. Because I think when you're vegan, like people, it kind of like makes people curious too. They're like, oh, you're vegan. That's like weird. Why are you vegan? So you just have these conversations all the time anyways. But then after that, they were like, yeah, so there's also this thing called the Save movement. So you will go to a slaughterhouse and actually bear witness to what's happening to these animals. And I was like, oh, I don't know about that one. Because I'm pretty sensitive and I can get like kind of emotional. And I was already like pretty passionate about animal rights. And after doing like activism at the Cube, I was like, okay, I want to do this on a regular basis. But then they were like, no, really, you should come and check it out. And I didn't realize before I went that the quote unquote most humane way to kill an animal in Australia is to lower them into a gas chamber. So we drove an hour and a half to go to this really big pig slaughterhouse in Western Australia. And this is a slaughterhouse where they kill thousands of pigs a day. And so I get out of the car, and the very first thing that I hear is pigs screaming as they are being lowered into this gas chamber. And it was really eerie because pigs sound just like humans when they scream. So when I got out of the car, I immediately started bawling. And it was so unexpected. Like, I didn't realize that was gonna happen, but I just like couldn't control myself. Like, these pigs were so close to me, but I was helpless. I couldn't do anything to stop that from happening. And then the next part of this action is where we actually bear witness and we stop the big commercial trucks before they go in. So these really big trucks with like the holes in the sides, they will come in packed full of pigs. And we had an agreement with the slaughterhouse that every time the trucks came in, they would stop for 3 minutes so that we could go up and say goodbye to the pigs. And so the first truck comes up and I'm like really anxious. I'm like shaking because I'm so nervous. And they stop the truck and I go up, and the first pig that I like make eye contact with, I start like petting his snout, and he starts to like slowly close his eyes and fall asleep. And I'm just sitting there like connecting with this like innocent being, I'm like, man, like this is just like my dog. And he's so calm and he's so peaceful and he has no idea what's about to happen to him. So I'm sitting there and I'm connecting with this pig, and then the truck honks its horn and starts to slowly pull away. And I could not get myself to like move backwards. So my friend had to literally come up behind me and yank me backwards away from the truck because I couldn't pull myself away from that pig. And it broke my heart. And it was crazy to me because I had been vegan for 4 years, and I had seen like the awful slaughterhouse footage, and I knew what was happening, and I was already appalled by it. But being there in person, I was like, man, this is real. Because we still, like, even when you're vegan, I still feel like there's a little bit of conditioning, and we can't truly understand, like, how horrible this is and what these animals are going through. Because if we killed humans at the same rate that we kill animals, the entire human population would be gone in 17 days. That's all it would take. And that's how many animals are dying. And it's just like, I feel like our brains can't even process how intense that is. And so after that slaughterhouse vigil, I was like, I need to show people this, and I need to talk to people about this, because I would have wanted someone to do that for me. Like at 9, when my sister showed me the video of the pig being killed, I stopped eating meat because I was like, I don't want to be the reason that that's happening. Because it's supply and demand, right? So if we're giving them our money and we're buying those products at restaurants or supermarkets, then they're going to keep fulfilling that demand. But if we stop like demanding that, then the supply will go down and less animals will die. And some people will be like, oh, but if everyone goes vegan overnight, then we're just going to have like thousands of like billions of cows and chickens and pigs. Like, where are they going to live? And that's just, the reality is that's not how it's going to work, right? Like, it's an individual thing, and it's a really fast growing movement. So veganism and the animal rights movement is the fastest growing social justice movement of our time. So in the US over the past few years, it's grown over 400%. So it's growing really, really fast, but the fact is that it's not going to grow fast enough to really cause us that many issues, right? Because like I said, as the demand goes down, so will the supply. And at the end of the day, like, none of us like to watch this happen. None of us want to go to a slaughterhouse and bear witness to what these animals are going through, because it puts us in a terrible mental state, right? It literally breaks our hearts. Yet we try and find all these different reasons to justify it. And I'm always like, why do people come up with these excuses? Because half the time it doesn't really seem like legitimate excuses. Like, I don't really believe that many people think that plants feel pain. But as a vegan, you hear that all the time. And I think it's just because it's scary to change, right? Like, this is all we've ever known. We've all grown up in this society that has told us that it's normal, natural, and necessary to eat meat. And we see, like, marketing all the time promoting these products. When I was in middle school, I would walk around the halls of my school and there would be Got Milk posters everywhere with like my favorite musicians on those posters. But that's kind of like the ultimate manipulation, right? Like, they're targeting children and telling us and convincing us that we need these products to be healthy. But at the end of the day, it's not even necessary. And not only is it not necessary, but it's terrible for us. Like, if you really think about it, the purpose of cow's milk is to turn a tiny baby calf into a 500-pound cow as quickly as possible. So it has IGF and factors and growth hormones in it that are really bad for humans to consume because it's the breast milk of another animal, right? And sometimes, like, people think it's weird when, like, mothers will breastfeed until their child is 3, but they're drinking the breast milk from a cow. Because cow's milk is for baby cows, and pig's milk is for baby pigs, and dog's milk is for baby dogs. But what these industries realized is that they could make money by convincing humans that we needed cow's milk. And so that's the basis of all of this. They don't care about the animals because they're just a means of making money. So it gets to a point where we start treating these animals like they're not living, sentient beings. But at the end of the day, like, these animals have the same emotions as our dogs. And most of us would never hurt our dogs, right? Much less eat them. And sometimes people will be like, oh, but I just eat a little bit of meat, or just like a little bit of eggs or a little bit of dairy. That's okay, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, so if I beat a dog just like once a week, like I like beat this dog with a baseball bat, that's okay, right? Just because it's like a little bit of suffering. Well, no, because it's unnecessary. So at the end of the day, if we have the option to either like eat some product and cause like thousands of animals to endure so much unnecessary violence, or we can eat something else that tastes just as good but doesn't have any suffering behind it, why wouldn't we choose the other one, right?
What kind of food doesn't have any suffering behind it?
Vegan food, right? Or maybe not, no suffering isn't the right word, but I think it's about doing the least amount of harm as possible, right? So some people will talk about, they'll be like, oh yeah, when we farm plants, like some like rats or mice or like little creatures will get like caught in the equipment. So there's still some suffering there. But there's also, like, when we raise animals for food, we have to feed them tons of plants in order for, like, to make them big before we send them to the slaughterhouse. So I think it takes 16 times more plants before we kill an animal so that we can eat meat. So even if you are concerned about, like, the mice or the insects that are getting hurt in the plant industry, then it makes more sense to be vegan. Because if you're like a plants rights activist or like a mice activist, then you're gonna want less to die. And it does suck that, like, we do live in this society where, like, we can't avoid all of the suffering. When we walk around, we might step on a spider or some ants by accident. But I think the main thing we have to keep in mind is our intention. I'm not going out of my way to hurt animals. You know, it's just an accidental thing. But if I'm buying an animal product in the supermarket, I am going out of my way to buy that product and pay for that animal to die. Because being vegan is really just a non-action. It's just not buying animal products. You know, and I think we overthink it a little bit in terms of what we're gonna eat too, because people are like, what, so I'm only gonna eat vegetables? And I think that like it's easier if you just kind of think about, okay, what do I eat right now? And how do I veganize that? Because that's kind of what I do, and it's really not that hard, right? And we have so many resources like on the internet. If you just Google like easy vegan recipes, then so many will come up. But then sometimes people will be like, oh, but it's so expensive. Like, I can't afford eating a Beyond Burger every day. That's really pricey. But when you think about it, in a lot of poor countries, they base their meals around staples that are already vegan. So things like beans and rice and potatoes and whole grains and in-season fruits and veggies, those are some of the cheapest things that you can buy. So if you're basing your meals around those anyways, then it's really, really affordable to be vegan. You know, and the food tastes amazing, but even if it didn't taste amazing, if it was just mediocre, the question I'm ask people, I'm like, well, do you think that your taste preferences are more important than the life of an animal? And I say that to people all the time at the Cube. Like, I'm like showing them this like graphic slaughterhouse footage, and I ask them that question, and people rarely say yes. Most people, I think, are like pretty logical about it. They're like, no, of course my taste buds are more important than that animal's life. You know, and that's why I think it's pretty easy to like convince people to adopt a vegan lifestyle, because most people already consider themselves animal lovers. You know, most of us wouldn't go out of our way to hurt an animal. So all I have to do is get those people to align their actions with what they already believe in, right? Because if you already believe it's wrong to unnecessarily hurt an animal, then you believe in veganism. And I always say, I'm like, I don't think it's the consumer's fault initially, right? Because we have grown up in the society that taught us that we needed to do these things. But I think the main thing is that once we know better, I think we should do better. You know, and once you know about what's happening to these animals, I don't think we should just be vegan. I think that we have to start actually trying to help them, right? Because if we see another like individual living being being oppressed, I think the ethical thing to do is to step in and to stop it from happening. And so that means that the moral baseline is to be an animal rights activist. Thank you.